Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I recently got into a good discussion with another angler in my hometown recently about how a spot on a local lake just does not produce anymore. And it got us talking about whether or not we thought it was based on pressure. And I think it's a pretty good discussion to have. So I thought I'd kind of get into it because I don't think it's as simple as just saying pressure. I think there's a lot of valuable things you need to look at before you can just point to the fact that maybe a spot is just getting beat on to the point where it's no longer being used by fish. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I think I've got some pretty interesting things to point out that may be the cause of it versus pressure. So I don't want to get right into just blaming pressure on the fact that a spot or a lake may not be any good anymore. Before I do get into that, though, I want to remind you that if you're looking for more content from me, some in-depth content, check out my members only page. That's a good place to look for additional content. You can have direct access to me. We have a monthly live stream. We talk about a lot of things that I don't necessarily talk about on the channel. I also want to point out that if you're looking for some help on your local lakes, or maybe you're going to a lake for vacation, check out the lake breakdowns that I do with fishthemoment.com. I'll put a link for that in the video description as well. All right, so let's talk about fishing pressure. So the discussion we had was about how a certain spot no longer produces like it used to. There was a period where that spot generally pumped out a ton of fish, but the reality is it's become a community hole and it just does not produce the fish like it used to. You used to be able to go there and catch a limit of fish on a few casts, and it was a great spot, but it also was a spot that very few anglers even knew about. It was really a very good tournament winning spot. Well, as you guys know, generally speaking, good tournament winning spots eventually get out and they turn into community spots, and that has happened with this spot. But I don't want to just blame it on the fact that it's become a community spot and gets a lot of pressure. I kind of wanted to touch base on some other things that have happened with it. Now, this spot I'm talking about is a location on my local lake in this area. It's a current-based place, and things have changed over time. One, the spot used to be a little bit deeper. It used to have a little bit faster current flow through it, and now I think it's gotten a little bit silted in. And generally speaking, the current flow has actually slowed up through there. It was kind of a inside ditch, I guess is what I'd say. Uh, you had a sandbar, you had some deeper water, and the current would cut through that sandbar. Well, the sandbar is kind of eroded away, and the inside is silted in, whether that's some of that sand, sand that's been misplaced or whether it's actual silt. I don't really have that answer for you. But you've got different current flow that goes through that area now. And generally speaking, to me, that does a lot of things. The less current flow changes how the fish set up. It doesn't make it nearly as good in terms of a ambush location, and we just don't seem to see the same amount of bait. So to me, what's really happened is the spot has changed and the fish aren't using it nearly as much as they used to. You still catch some fish there, but it's not like it used to be. And I know a lot of people are fishing it, but I still feel like if a good spot is a good spot because of the actual location and there's bait fish and stuff there, the fish are going to use it. But this makes me really want to evaluate all of the locations that people tend to want to say are destroyed by pressure. There's a lot of things that can change. So you really need to evaluate everything that's going on there. First and foremost, I think your bait and your forage is going to be the biggest thing. There are lots of times where you'll see one specific area just have bait for a year. And because it's got a lot of bait, it tends to be a phenomenal spot for that year. The bait move out, all of a sudden it's like a ghost town. So I think the forage is the number one thing to look for. Beyond that, you want to look at the structure itself. So maybe it was a rock pile. Well, you want to say the rocks haven't changed, but sometimes things do change. You could have some instance where some of the rock actually silts in. If it's a place in heavy current, you do actually have rock movement at times. But more than anything with rock, what I tend to find can ruin a spot is when you get that kind of filament algae type growth that happens on the rock. So if it's clean rock, that's generally much better. If it's rock that's got a lot of that filamenty type stuff on it, that black hair, that really tends to hurt a spot, in my opinion. So You may have 1 year where the rock's clean, 1 year where it's got a bunch of growth on it, and therefore that can change the location if it's rock based. With weeds, you see weed changes and growth patterns all the time. I mean, I've had lots and lots of really good grass clumps that are good for 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden they start growing different. Maybe they're not as thick, maybe they're too thick, maybe they're not. They don't form a point that they had. Maybe it just overgrows. So your grass is one that changes all the time. So just because you had a spot that was really good for a year or two doesn't mean that that growth pattern doesn't change. And I mean, grass in itself can really change too. You know, 1 year you might have a good milfoil patch. Another year, another grass might actually dominate it and overgrow it. And it's different year upon year upon year. So it's not quite the same. So grass, more than anything, really changes, in my opinion. The same thing can happen with wood. You've got some years where, a piece of wood can be phenomenal, and then all of a sudden that silts in, or maybe it moves because the current pushed it, or maybe you've got, a stump that was a great stump because the fish could go through the roots, and all of a sudden that fills in and the fish can't get under it. And now it's just the base, it's just the thick stump. So a lot of things can change with wood. Um, and just when you're talking about any sort of bottom composition, you can have changes as well, from clean bottom to silted bottom to, grass overgrows it. Things change year upon year upon year. So I think a lot of times we commonly want to say it's all based on pressure, but I don't really feel like it's always based on pressure. I think spots tend to change. I've seen spots go from being great spots to not good for a few years to being really good again for a couple of years. And to me, that's not pressure, because those spots are hit the same amount year over year over year. But really what's happening is the other factors are changing, which make the spot go good, then not good, then good again. I think the same can be said a lot of times for just your water temperature. Based on water temperature and conditions, fish might set up in certain areas uh, at certain times, and they're not there at other times. Now, I will say, I do think that there's a valid argument to say that pressure can affect the fishing sometimes, just based on overall fishing pressure. I have seen where I feel like lakes have had issues based on the amount of pressure, meaning the population actually drops. So from that standpoint, if you get a ton of fishing pressure, I think you do have more of a higher mortality rate. I do think you can sometimes lead to more virus or sickness. If you've got a lot of fish that are getting hooked, you've got open sores and just various things. So I think the fish can tend to succumb to pressure where the population actually takes a hit for a little bit. Um, but that's not necessarily a spot thing. That's a population thing. So I do think, I'm not saying pressure doesn't have an effect. I think oftentimes what can happen with some of these spots that are really good is the pressure. If you have a good school of fish, the fish either get accustomed to your baits, or the fish don't set up as good as they would because one gets caught, they kind of scatter, and another boat pulls up before those fish can reposition. So I do think you can have it uh, pressure effective, but I'm stating that I really think a lot of times the spot changes before the pressure affects the spot, if that makes sense. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. It was a really good conversation that I had with a fellow angler. Uh, I love discussions like that because I think when you have good communication, you can view other people's points and ideas and thought processes, which oftentimes are different from the ones that we have. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about that in the comment section. Do you think pressure is, say, the dominating force on a spot, or do you think maybe it's often blamed for a spot not being as good as it generally is? So thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate all the support. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.